Tonight we will be delving into the world of murder and the macabre, of dastardly villains and beautiful young ladies, sometimes both of them at once. Yes, tonight is the Millennials' Guide to Alfred Hitchcock. Yes, tonight we're going to be looking at the films of Alfred Hitchcock. He is one of the most seminal movie directors of all time. His films are world famous, highly regarded. They managed to do that thing of being very interesting, often quite novel, but at the same time having being accessible to the public at large. They're kind of the category I would put in, makes you think slightly more. They're not highbrow art films, but they're not dumb, poorly plotted popcorn films of the type we've seen recently. He is he was a master of his craft, and he deserves to be remembered, and his films watched by generation after generation. Now, you might be one of the millennials that we older people like to sneer at. Perhaps you're one of those people who go, well, I like the movies of Joss Whedon, and recently I've been watching Black Panther and Captain Marvel and The Shape of Water. They're my favourite films. Right, well, you need to stop and you need to look back into the past at Alfred Hitchcock. Well, I don't like watching films before 1990 because they're problematic with their depiction of minorities and women, blah, blah, blah. Right, forget that, because you have got to view films in the context of their times. But there's so much you can learn from Alfred Hitchcock, the way he plotted a film. Why? I'll give you some reasons why Alfred Hitchcock is a seminal figure in motion pictures. He gave cinema a lot of its terms, particularly in script writing. He came up with the idea of the MacGuffin. Now, the MacGuffin is a plot device, basically. It's the thing that initiates the action in a film. It could be an object that people want. So in Hitchcock's films, it could be a microfilm, or it could be a suitcase filled with money. I'll give you a classic example of a MacGuffin from a film you might have seen. It's the suitcase with the mysterious golden thing in it in Pulp Fiction. That is a MacGuffin. And Hitchcock used this very well. The MacGuffin didn't even have to be an object. It could be a person. In North by Northwest, the MacGuffin is a fake identity called Roger Thornhill. So the MacGuffin is whatever drives the initial action. It might not necessarily play a huge part in the film that follows, but it's there to kick things and keep the plot moving. Other things that he did was very fast-paced editing. That was something he did. He and his film crew kind of invented the contrazoom. Now, the contrazoom is something that you have seen smart aleck film directors use a lot in recent years. Hitchcock did it first in 1958 in a film he did called Vertigo. And that is where it's a simultaneous move. You're tracking the camera backwards or forwards whilst at the same time adjusting the focus of the camera. So what happens is it's stretched, so the background will zoom out whilst the main character remains in focus in the foreground. It looks like the world is retreating behind him. You've all seen that shot. Hitchcock did it first. A cross-cutting rapid editing, which he used to great effect in Psycho, and other things. One of the things that Hitchcock is widely remembered for is his use of suspense in films. Now, Hitchcock explained this himself in an interview where he said that most directors before he came along didn't know really how to do suspense. So, for example, if, let's say, a bomb was planted under a restaurant table and two characters were eating and were unaware that the bomb was under their table, and then suddenly the bomb blows up, how previous film directors and most average film directors would do it is that the bomb wouldn't be shown, the two people would eat, then the table would blow up, then people would explain in dialogue afterwards, oh, there must have been a bomb under the table. But planted by whom? They thought that was suspense. The suspense was that who could have planted this bomb? Alfred Hitchcock came up with the idea that you would show the bomb being placed in the first place. You might even show who the bomb maker themselves, or the plot. People would talk about the plot beforehand, say, we're going to place a bomb under this table. And then the two people would sit down, unaware that the bomb was there, but the audience would know. And Hitchcock liked flipping the suspense formula around, not by keeping the audience in the dark, but by fully informing the audience that the audience would have more information than the characters on screen. And the tension and the suspense would come from, will the characters in the film discover this plot, the thing that's happening against them in time? That's how Hitchcock viewed things. So I'm going to give you a rundown now of my recommendations. I'm going to give a kind of whistle-stop tour through Hitchcock's career. I haven't got time to really go into each film in detail, and he did so many films I can't possibly cover them all, but I'm going to just go through his career chronologically and highlight what I think are some of the must-see films from each era. Hitchcock was born in 1899 in London, and he started very young in the film industry. By his 20s, he was directing films in the British film industry. He really came to prominence in 1927 with a film called The Lodger, starring Britain's really only international star of the time, which was Ivan Novello, as a kind of creepy serial killer type. It was a big success, and it showed a lot of visual flair for the time. It's a silent film, and it showed he used a lot of film techniques to create suspense. So he was marked out as someone with a lot of promise. 1929, he directs Britain's first talkie called Blackmail, starring the first of his blondes. Hitchcock had a thing for blonde actresses, and he loved putting them into peril. It's a motif that you'll see throughout his films. But his first one was a Czech actress called Annie Ondra, and really she is very lovely to look at. So this 1929 film, Blackmail, was good because it was the first talkie. And what was interesting about the film was how not so much Hitchcock's visual style, which was good. There's a very good dramatic rooftop chase scene in the film. But his use of sound, he was very quick to realize the potential of using sound in an innovative way. So there's one bit where this Annie Ondra's character is feeling very guilty about something. I'm not going to blow the spoilers, but she's sort of scared at the word knife. And then her landlady's just talking nonchalantly in the background, just jabbering on. But every time the landlady says the word knife to say, pass the butter, knife, have you got a bread knife? You know, it was always heightened the sound of the word knife because that's what's going through Annie Ondra's character's mind, you know, that she's frightened of this word. That was a big hit. And then Hitchcock started doing some films, starting to build up his reputation throughout the 1930s in the British film industry, which was a little bit cash-starved even then. But he managed to hit the big time internationally with his version of John Buchan's novel, The 39 Steps. And the film really does, it's a 1935 film, and it really does depart from the novel quite a lot, but it's got a really good leading actor in Robert Donat. There's a lot of action, suspense, chase. Hitchcock's in his element. It features an autogyro sort of on a manhunt. So he's got the kind of the visual tricks, you know, just going for a wow moment. Yeah, an autogyro in a 1930s film. So he was building up. He also did The Man Who Knew Too Much, a film version of Joseph Conrad's The Secret Agent, which again departs quite a bit from the book. But it's got that Hitchcock style. You know, he's not afraid to jettison the wordy elements of a book in order to make a good suspense film. Towards the end of the 1930s, he has another huge hit in The Lady Vanishes with Michael Redgrave. Fantastic film. It's a good suspense film. It's a kind of pre-World War II involving a Nazi plot and everything. And good comic relief in it as well. The dialogue is humorous. It's zingy. It's sassy. It's sexy. It's suspenseful. It's spy drama. So with The Lady Vanishes, Hollywood comes a-calling. So we'll now move on to the 1940s. So once he's in Hollywood, Hitchcock's films generally fall into two camps. One is the psychological thriller, and the other one is him being a bit experimental and having a kind of a one-location film. So let me deal with the psychological thriller part first. So he does a series of films, and I think the standout ones are Rebecca, made in 1940, with Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine, in this part of Hitchcock's career, becomes his blonde in peril. That's based on the Daphne du Maurier novel. Fantastic, creepy atmosphere. What's going on in Mandalay, this mysterious mansion. What is Joan Fontaine married into? Is Laurence Olivier going mad? Is he going to kill her? So it's a really chilling psychological story, well worth checking out. A few years later, he follows this up with Suspicion, with Cary Grant and Joan Fontaine. Yes, Joan Fontaine, again, a woman in peril. What is she married into? Is Cary Grant going mad? Is he trying to kill her? But even though some of the elements between Rebecca and Suspicion seem similar, they are played very differently. And they're great, is he, isn't he, will he, won't he? It keeps you guessing right up to the end in both films. He did The Parodying Case, another kind of standout film, and then another Cary Grant one, Notorious, where Ingrid Bergman is the woman in peril. Will he, won't he kill her? Is he going mad? What has she got herself into? But that's played more as a spy thriller. With Cary Grant, is he pimping out his wife, Ingrid Bergman, to get classified information from enemy agents? So it's again, really good psychological film. Now, as I said, Hitchcock does a bit of experimentation as well. And the first of his kind of experimental films in Hollywood is Lifeboat. Now, Lifeboat is set entirely on a lifeboat. The whole film is just on this lifeboat. It's about 8 or 10 characters, all on a lifeboat because they're all traveling on a merchant ship that was sunk by a U-boat, but the U-boat itself gets sunk as well. So you have all these passengers from different social classes, different states of health. Some come aboard injured, and one crew member of the U-boat is also hauled on board the lifeboat, and they've got to figure out how to survive and whether they're going to get rescued. And they're all kind of chalk and cheese personalities. Will they get on? Will the German be up to no good in it? What's going to the fate of the two injured characters as well? So I won't play any spoilers, but it's interesting to see Hitchcock just with a cast of really talented, mainly theatre actors, just confining himself to one set. And this set, even though it's filmed in the studio, is meant to be at sea, so it's got to look convincing enough. And I think it still holds up today. It's still extremely watchable. Next of his experimental films is his first colour film. In 1948, he makes a film called Rope. It's set in one location again, which is a New York high-rise apartment. What's interesting about Rope is that it's a murder mystery set in one location, and it's all done in long takes. Hitchcock ideally he wanted to film it all in one go, all in one take, but of course film cameras at the time were only capable of filming 20-minute segments, and then he had to change the film. So Hitchcock did it that way. I think there's only 6 cuts in the film. And they mask the transition from the end of one reel of film to the start of the next by, say, having a character walk very closely to the lens and sort of masking it for a second. Then when it comes back, we're on to the next roll of film. And it was really good to see Hollywood movie actor James Stewart just using this longer format to really develop his character and to really let the dialogue build up and flow. Hitchcock was really good with it. He sets the film in early evening, and the course of the film, it gets darker and darker. He actually had the studio lights outside the set sort of on a timer to just gradually get lower and lower, and the lights on in the backdrop, the fake backdrop scenery sort of coming on to represent the lights of other high-rise buildings and the New York skyline being lit up. So it's a really good experimental film. So by the start of the 1950s, Hitchcock's star is absolutely at its apex. And he has the choice of whatever he wants to do. Sticking with the psychological thriller genre, which he was a master at, which he loved. He adapted Patricia Highsmith's novel Strangers on the Train. Highsmith and Hitchcock seem made for each other. And this is a standout film, Strangers on the Train. The setup is two men who never met before in their lives meet on a train, and they complain about their problems in life. One man, his domineering mother. On the other hand, the other man is going through a bitter divorce with his wife, and he's facing financial ruin. So both men come up with the idea that they should murder the other one's problem, because they'd be both would have an alibi, and they have no connection to the other person. Nobody can ever connect these two ever meeting on a train, and the plot sort of goes from there. Very suspenseful, fantastic climactic scene at a carnival. So that's another one I would highly recommend. Now we're into peak Hitchcock in this phase. And I think the next standout one of the 1950s is the one, it's my personal favourite Hitchcock film, and that's Rear Window. Rear Window, again, it's one of these Hitchcock things where he's confined himself to one location. So you've got James Stewart. Essentially, a lot of Hitchcock films either feature Cary Grant or James Stewart. That's no bad thing. I mean, two top quality actors for their age. So James Stewart plays a photojournalist who's broken his leg, and he's kind of sat there, bored out of his skull, convalescing in his New York apartment. But what happens is that he can look out the back window of his apartment into this kind of shared courtyard. So it's a kind of quadrangle apartment complex. And he can look into the shared garden. He can look into the windows of his neighbours. They don't, because it's hot summer day, people aren't closing their windows or drawing the curtains. So he can see into a lot of their rooms. And gradually he starts psychoanalyzing these neighbours, even though he has no personal contact with them. So he starts sort of looking at their lives and piecing together their life stories and what they're going through, the trials and tribulations that his neighbours are going through guesswork. But then he starts noticing an anomaly, that there's a couple and they have an argument, and then the wife isn't seen. And then there's a disturbed plot of ground and patch of ground in their communal garden. And from that, has he witnessed a murder? Can he solve a murder confined in a chair with his leg in a cast? It's absolutely fantastic. This is Hitchcock at his best. He's got these limitations as to what his character can do. So he's using every visual trick. And the set for the apartment quadrangle is fantastic. Jimmy Stewart, top form. He's got Grace Kelly. That's his 1950s blonde in peril. She features also in Dial M for Murder and To Catch a Thief. So, and if she hadn't married Prince Rainier of Monaco, she probably would have kept going on in Hitchcock's films. So I've just mentioned another couple there. Dial M for Murder, very good, based on a stage play, but Hitchcock does well to kind of, give it a kind of cinematic feel. And To Catch a Thief is a great romp in the south of France with Cary Grant and Grace Kelly. What more could you ask for? Going into the late 50s, he has another couple of standout films. One is North by Northwest. This is a lot of people's favourites, and I wouldn't disagree with them. Cary Grant again, innocent man, mistaken identity, goes on the run, hooks up with Eva Marie Saint, another blonde, and has to clear his name and unravel a spy conspiracy at the same time. Its most famous scene is, of course, Cary Grant running through a field of corn being chased by a crop duster, and there's also a climactic scene dangling from Abraham Lincoln's nose at Mount Rushmore. He followed up in 1958 with Vertigo, where he was using lots of camera tricks like the Contra Zoom I mentioned before. Jimmy Stewart, this time as a detective with Vertigo. So psychologically screwed up. And Kim Novak, now the blonde of choice for Alfred Hitchcock. She is this woman who bears an uncanny resemblance to his dead wife. um, okay, it's so psychological. It's, Freudian, Jungian, you name it. It's all thrown into the mix. It wasn't that well received at the time. I think it was thought of as too kind of weird and kooky. These days, people appreciate it for its cinematic techniques and its pioneering use of the camera. And a fantastic James Stewart performance as well as man psychologically on the edge. So Hitchcock then going into the 60s, it looked like he had lost a little bit of the flair, so he needed to pare things back. Also, the new decade was going to throw more challenges. Was he going to lead from the front, or was he just going to follow other filmmakers? Well, he decided to lead from the front, but by doing something very different. So in 1960, he made a black and white film. He hadn't made one for many years. And he primarily he had a television series going on at the same time in the late 50s and early 60s called Alfred Hitchcock Presents, where he did these 1 hour macabre, sting in the tail type mysteries. It was an anthology show. And so he took the film crew from that, TV film crew, and basically a back lot at Universal Studios, and just filmed a low budget or predominantly comparatively low budget film to what he'd been working on, something like North by Northwest. And that film was Psycho. And Psycho just rewrote everything. It's really the... no, I wouldn't say it's the first nasty slasher film. It was beaten by a few months by a British film called Peeping Tom. But where Peeping Tom bombed at the box office and ruined a lot of reputations, Psycho, dealing with very similar material, actually managed to be a huge international hit. It is the film that most people associate with Alfred Hitchcock. Just the kind of the main character being this psycho killer. I won't say more because I think you need this, even in this day and age where practically Psycho's been ripped off, parodied, aped so many times. You probably know all the ins and outs of it, but still, even if you haven't, even if you're a millennial who doesn't watch films made before 1990, I want to leave as many shocks in that film as possible. So moving on into the 60s, Hitchcock, he's getting on a bit now. Are there any more tricks left? Well, yes, there are, but I think his he goes into a dark phase now for the last part of his career. So after Psycho, he does The Birds. And his blonde of choice this time round is... Oh, by the way, in Psycho, the blonde of choice is Janet Leigh. It's Tippi Hedren. She's in this film and the next film, Marnie. So The Birds is kind of... Let's say, is it horror? Is it science fiction? Is it neither? But what it is that it's a small town. There's Tippi Hedren, there's Rod Taylor. And suddenly the birds get nasty and start attacking people and start destroying things. And suddenly it becomes very kind of eco-apocalyptic. It wasn't that big a hit at the time. People were scratching their head. Well, why do these birds attack? No reason is given in particular. It's just nature turning on people. But that's not the point. The point is to create a kind of cinematic tension. How are these characters going to get out? Will these characters ever get out of this situation? How can he's doing something that Doctor Who would do, which let's take something normal and mundane and make it a deadly threat. So he does that. That's not a big success. Then in 1964 he does Marnie. He's got Tippi Hedren, but this time he's cast Sean Connery, hot from his first trilogy of Bond films. And so that's again dark, psychological. There's a possible rape scene in it. It can be read both ways. A bit like Straw Dogs. What's going on there. So it's a dark psychological thriller. I think critics and fans were divided at the time. 1966, he does Torn Curtain, a spy thriller with Paul Newman and Julie Andrews. I think it was one of Hitchcock's unhappiest experiences because he really didn't get on with the method style of acting of Paul Newman, and he's got Julie Andrews as well, who's trying to slightly change her image from the sweet musical star. Um, and then there's other films. Admittedly, I haven't seen Topaz or some of the others, but in 1972 comes, and this is where I'm going to leave it. I know he did a film after 1972, but I really want to leave this summary on my last recommendation, which is Frenzy. So Hitchcock, after years and years and decades in Hollywood, comes back to Britain, and he's going to do a British thriller. Um, and it's Frenzy's a strange film because I said it's made in 1972. But to Hitchcock, London is still the London of 1938. And he films it, even though this should be a kind of just slightly after swinging London, kind of getting into, I suppose, we're sort of Euston Films, Gritty Sweeney's era, the Sweeney era London. He's got the kind of people are dressed like the 1970s, but the way he depicts things, like the old markets, the old pubs, it feels like it's from the 1930s. It is a dark, macabre thriller with very black humor in it. It stars John Finch and Barry Foster. Apparently, not that well known at the time. Foster before he gets cast as Vanderval, and Finch before he does. No, this is just after Finch played Macbeth for Roman Polanski. And there's a brief time when John Finch was thought to be the next big thing of British cinema. It never quite worked out for John Finch for reasons I will explain in either an article or another video. But suffice to say, these are two actors, and Hitchcock was very happy with these two. He had ideas of making more films with John Finch and Barry Foster in them. And it's about a man wrongly accused of being a serial killer, and he has to clear his name. And there's a lot of dark black humor. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but the visual techniques are still there. Even though I'm saying Hitchcock was making a film that looks slightly out of time, he's still got the power to do something visually innovative in certain scenes. One where the real serial killer kills someone and the camera just pans back out into the street, and everybody's having their kind of life in Smithfield Market just going on normally, unaware of what's going on in this one building. So he's still got the visual techniques, still really dark humor in Frenzy. Not that easy a watch, not A grade Hitchcock. We're not talking Rear Window or North by Northwest, but still, it's interesting. I think it would be like it's kind of a higher class 70s slasher film. It's the best way to describe it. So, in summary, if I had to pick 5 Hitchcock films for you millennials to watch, definitely Rear Window, definitely North by Northwest. Psycho is a must. It's a staple of film history, so that's a must watch. Going back a bit, I would say The Lady Vanishes. What would be? I think we need another 1940s one. I would go for Notorious. I think that's it's got a lot of good combination there. Frankly, you could pick Notorious, Suspicion, or Rebecca. Any one of those three as a 5th choice, but I think Notorious edges it out. I think it's slightly better constructed film. A lot of good psychology going on there. So until next time, have a pleasant dreams and don't have nightmares unless I'm involved in them.